Serbia lies in ruins. After the Axis invasion of Yugoslavia, our country has never been the same. The so-called Government of National Salvation is trying to hold our country together. With both Chetniks, Serbian monarchists, and communist partisans still being active against them, the only reason the government has managed to keep the nation together is due to their alliance with the Germans, which have stationed detachments across our country. After years of economical stagnation and decline, the government is finally trying to address this issue. And they have decided to put our focus on agrarianism, granting subsidies to farmers, giving them better financial stability and modernizing our agriculture with the little resources we have. They also established farmer battalions with the goal of teaching our farmers the discipline of a royal guard to help them with their job. As our farms start producing more and more, especially fruit, we reopen the markets. All this will hopefully turn us into the new Balkan breadbasket. However, the government has another issue to fix, that of terrorism, and it goes hand in hand with our agriculture. You can't grow crops if terrorists keep blowing them up. While it would be best for the government to deal with both sides, the partisans are growing too strong. Cooperating with the Chetniks is the safest option, so that's what they went for. And so the battle against the partisans begin. With the help of the rural Chetniks, they began to reinforce the countryside, crushing many partisans who has it as their safe haven. Then the military began fighting the communists in Uzice, a former partisan state. After they were successful, the whole army and several Chetnik paramilitary groups were moved to the north to our border with Banat. Here the SS Ordenstadt had been established, and with the support of Germany they are ravaging the neighboring provinces, including ours. We will try our best to repel their attacks and hopefully they will bother the Hungarian and Romanian instead. However, the chances are slim. Our army is one of the weakest in Europe, and while the government is putting in effort at improving it, it will take time. While the strengths of the partisans have plummeted, the Chetniks have only grown. And after a march in Obrenavok, a part of Belgrade, they had grew stronger and more popular than the government themselves. But there is still hope for the government. A surprise invitation from the Banat leader Sepp Janko to discuss the return of Banat to us has excited our president. He has decided to immediately visit him, and if successful, the reintegration of Banat would massively boost the popularity of the government. On the way to Pančevo, a town in Banat, his driver took one wrong turn and they found themselves in the city's lower income neighborhood. And then, out of nowhere, 5 gunshots were heard and our president was killed. As the news spread to Belgrade, the city quickly fell into disorder, and soon a group of soldiers stormed the parliament, proclaiming the government of national salvation over, and put Mihailovic, the Chetnik leader, in charge of the country instead. He has promised to raise our nation from its fallen feet for king and fatherland. However, the Chetnik rule is not secured. Despite being weakened, the partisan resistance has sprung up after the fall of the Salvation government. We will try to stop them as fast as possible by organizing raids and continue from there. However, it was all sabotaged by fascist paramilitaries and parts of the military still loyal to the government. As our nation spiraled out of control, the Serbian civil war began. The fascists kicked us out of Belgrade, but they didn't manage to capture Morava. And from here we could organize an offensive to the town of Šačak. A bloody battle ensued with hundreds of dead on both sides, but we had the upper hand and could soon secure the town. We recruited new militias in the countryside to help us win the civil war. Our fight for freedom against the fascists and the German sympathizers will be secured. One of the militias had risen up behind the fascist lines, and despite being kicked out, we saw it as a great opportunity to try and capture the province, especially since one of their troops would get encircled. But our victory took longer than expected. The partisans had raided and destroyed some of our supply, and the fascists had raised several new militias. Still, we eventually captured Smederevo and encircled 2 fascist divisions. While we did lose Čačak, it was worth it. We immediately started an offensive to Belgrade, the pocket and Čačak. Surprisingly, all were successful. Belgrade and the pocket were both cleared of fascists, and as we turned towards Čačak, we eventually managed to capture their last city. The civil war has been won, but our nation is still not secured. The partisans roam in the countryside and our economy is even weaker than before the war. We must immediately begin to try to bring order to this chaos. The first step is to end all paramilitary activities by integrating most of them into the army. Secondly, the Serbian Reconstruction Initiative will begin. The agricultural sector will be restarted and efforts will be put on industry as well. But physical recovery is not enough. The mental issue of the partisans has to be resolved. And luckily, despite the civil war, we have managed to capture many of them. And with the Croatian civil war, with a loyal Titoist rising up, many partisans are fleeing to help them instead, including Tito himself, which sadly managed to escape the trial we were preparing for him. With the partisans out of Serbia, we can now safely turn to reform our country. According to our provisional constitution, a council has to be formed on each issue where party deputies will debate it and decide the course of our country. The first item on the agenda are trade policy. The idea of autarky against that of free trade. After 12 hours of debate, one of them won the vote. Autarky, due to one simple fact. Free trade in the chaotic Balkan region can only realistically be obtained when pigs start flying. So now the next issues which will decide the course of our nation. Firstly, that of the rights of the Serbian workers and trade unions. Just like the last debate, it was heated. One side wanted to ban all trade unions, however they lost, and trade unions will still be allowed but still controlled by the government. The next issue is about our economy, a more centralized or a decentralized one. After the same sides debated for over 14 hours, it was finally concluded that a centralized economy would be best, especially since we had chosen autarky as our trade policy. The last issue before the race for leadership between the two sides is that of religion. It was decided for the sake of stability, especially if we manage to unify Yugoslavia, that we need to embrace secularism. Both sides had won 2 of the debates, and they were Milošević, the Chetnik leader, supporting a more authoritarian stance, and Puric, a conservative liberal wanting to create a Serbian democracy. And the disagreements between the two had reached an all-time high. Both were trying to get rid of the other to secure their future for Serbia, while Milošević was the most influential due to his role in the ousting of the fascist government. Puric had a secret weapon. Files containing unknown information about Chetnik collaboration with the Nazis during the Second World War. And while Milošević tried his best to destroy them, Puric managed to keep them away from him, and with them he could win over the cabinet. Our first priority is to transition to civilian rule away from the Chetniks of Milošević. Under the guidance of Puric, Serbia will be transformed into one of the only democratic states in the Balkans. And so, with the strengthening of political and civil rights and a professional political staff, we are ready to face the future. Furthermore, the race for power is practically won by Puric, as Milošević had been arrested for allegedly trying to attack him. However, while the government is under complete control of Puric, many people are still supporting the authoritarian Chetniks. We have to win over them to our side. So we will continue with our actions to improve our industry, winning over the city folks and granting the farmers even more investment to improve their situation as well. And so we have recovered from the civil war. Remember the documents about Milošević? Well, as he was arrested, they were finally revealed, and despite him helping us liberate ourselves, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. The race has been won by Puric, and a new, truly democratic Serbia can rise. So finally everything has been taken care of, our country is stable and its future is bright. Peter II can finally return to Serbia and be crowned as its head. Of course with the democratic constitution under him. Long live the king! With him back and our country having fully recovered from the civil war, we can both invest further into our economy to make it stronger than ever and prepare for our first election. And then after these lengthy preparations we will put our sight on all of Yugoslavia. But we first have to prepare. And we will start by preparing our economy. With our economic relief mandate we will seek to bring our economy on par with the Western ones. This battle must be fought on 4 fronts. The battle for the civilian industry, the battle for our roads and infrastructure, that for our military industry, and lastly that for education. However, we can't forget the importance of agriculture. While some of our farmers started growing fruits, most of our land still goes to wheat production, the cheapest crop. Instead, we will encourage our farmers to switch to more profitable ones. With all the extra money, we can continue to reform our agriculture through mechanization and better education for our farmers. While the government had improved our economy, they had also taken new steps towards a stronger democracy and the future first election. The Chetniks, still holding substantial power in our politics and the army, were purged. And the question of Mikhailovich was revisited. Some wanted his complete execution, too radical. Others wanted him under house arrest, too forgiving. So we settled for exile, kicking him away from our country. The second most important thing in a democracy after majority rule is safety for minorities. So we will reconcile with non-Serbs after the failure of the old Yugoslavia. That time Yugoslavia was more or less ruled by Serbians, this time it will be ruled by Yugoslavians alike. To reach this goal we have to start now, before we have even united Yugoslavia. The minorities will finally get their rights and freedom back. We are soon ready for the first election, however we have to be wary of reactionary and radical groups. As we started cracking down on the Chetniks, the more radical parts of their organization are joining forces with the National Socialists. But with the king's watchful eye everything will turn out okay, and with his help we will start democratic propaganda to enlighten our population. Quickly back to our industry, we have started investing into tungsten and steel mines. After that, our state intervention in the economy soon picked up speed as we established crown companies. But that was not all. We restarted our banking sector and used it to stabilize our currency, creating stability for our consumers and investors. Back to our politics, the election is just around the corner. 3 main political parties have been established. The Conservative People's Radical Party, the Liberal Democratic Party, and the Social Democrat Socialist Party of Yugoslavia. As the polls around the country were set up, we hired several poll watchers to prevent fraud and keep radical groups away. And so the elections had arrived, the time for the people to vote for our future is here. And surprisingly, the winners of this election weren't the Conservative of Puric, instead the Liberals somehow managed to win. The Liberals formed a coalition with the Conservatives, and while they will continue to reform our economy, they have pledged to finally begin the unification of Yugoslavia. After the civil war and as the Chetnik militias were disbanded, our whole army only consisted of 27,000 men. Luckily we have managed to strengthen our numbers to 80,000, but this is not enough. And currently all our men are organized and trained in infantry divisions. We need something more than this. So to achieve both our goals we created 2 new elite mountaineer divisions. Now, after lengthy preparations, we are ready to start. Yugoslavia will be united under our king and democracy. The Nazis and communists will be crushed and all of Yugoslavia will be saved. Beginning with bringing back Banat to us. We declared war, but pushing into the country is impossible. Their army is probably bigger than ours and a river is in the way. So instead of trying to attack and sacrifice our men, we turned to the most risky and dangerous plan: voluntary retreat. We left Smederevo completely open and let the German bandits flood into the eastern parts of our country, making sure Belgrade was protected at all times. Soon they had captured all of Morava and reached to Albania. That's when we launched the counterattack. It was slow as the SS bandits had tanks and mechanized vehicles, but our superior numbers and with our home turf advantage we managed to liberate Kraljevo. As the bandits tried to kick us back again, they only made their situation worse, and with low organization we could encircle more than 40,000 of their army. They were all swiftly captured or killed. But we didn't stop there. Smederevo was captured and we reached the Romanian border in a matter of hours. All of Banat was now cut off from the majority of their army and we began fighting our way to their capital. It was no problem at all, and all of Banat was soon captured as the rest of the bandits either surrendered or fled into neighboring countries. The first step of unification has been achieved. From now on we can just keep this up and Yugoslavia will be united and free anytime. And the next step is Vojvodina. The Hungarians are in a personal union with Romania, but if we manage to simply capture the region quickly, the Romanians probably won't bother. As we began crossing the border, we expected a quick victory, though the Hungarians quickly organized the defense and kicked us back to Banat. Sadly, we will have to take it by force later and not now. The Romanians will be called in and we aren't strong enough to destroy both. So instead we will turn to our weakest neighbor, the Marxist-Leninist Albania. Kosovo and West Macedonia will be brought back to Yugoslavia, and after that we can turn to Bulgaria. All of Macedonia is back. Albania has been saved from their communist regime, and despite the Bulgarian government asking for peace, we crushed their whole fascist army and government and established a liberal government with the intent of spreading democracy to Bulgarians as well. During the two wars, we expanded our army with 6 new infantry divisions and created an experimental light tank divisions with the captured tanks from our wars. And they will be needed since now the most difficult parts of our reunification have arrived. But conventional warfare won't be sufficient. We will lean more heavily into guerrilla warfare and partisans behind enemy lines. We will form a new resistance movement, the King's Loyal Partisans. With moderate resistance in Montenegro already, we decided to prepare unification with our lost brother through revolt. We had planned to spend 2 months to build up our resistance movement in the country. However, the Montenegro government under control of Italy took a heroic step and expelled them and joined us instead, without any bloodshed needed. Croatia can now be captured and the Tito is destroyed. But we have to be really careful. They have a stronger army and military economy than us. This means we have to rely on our own royal partisans more than ever. But they are currently very weak in Bosnia and Croatia. To strengthen it, we will supply both the Croatian and Bosnians with more weapons and send officers to help the resistance fighters. We simply expanded the resistance networks until the Bosnian resistance was high. The Croatian was still low, but we don't have any more time to wait, so we launched both revolts. The one in Croatia was unsurprisingly unsuccessful, but the resistance fighters in Bosnia saw much more success and could secure Banja Luka. Sadly, they won't be able to handle this alone. A direct intervention is needed. So we declared war and began marching into Bosnia. Bosnia. Only 2 provinces, including Visegrad, were captured before the whole Croatian army had arrived to defend. Seeing the sheer number of troops, we immediately launched the first wave of conscripts to almost double our military size. While we waited for these reinforcements, we launched small offensives into the mountainous region of Herzegovina and managed to move forward with the help of our mountaineers. Surprisingly, this was not all we managed to achieve. The Croatians are throwing themselves into our defenses, so we have already killed or captured 18,000 men. This, together with how unorganized they were, allowed us to capture Sarajevo and later Tuzla. After that, we even performed an encirclement on 3 of their divisions by capturing a city bordering the Hungarian border. It seems we don't need the extra divisions in training. They already have higher casualties than our own army. With massive troop concentrations in Dubrovnik and Mostar, we decided to try and encircle both cities at once. At first, the offensive was successful and we arrived only a few kilometers from the Adriatic Sea, but they managed to stop us, so instead we decided to go for a smaller encirclement by first capturing Mostar and then trying again to reach the sea. While we did close the encirclement rather quickly, it took time to consolidate it. Still, their resistance couldn't stop us and all divisions in Dubrovnik were captured. This is basically the end for them. Our army has shown itself much more organized and effective, and the Croatians are both lacking manpower and industry. We launched our last offensive towards Zagreb, and while they managed to keep us back for a while, once we broke through there was nothing stopping us. The city was captured and all units in Slovenia were encircled and destroyed, and after a few more battles they finally surrendered. All of Croatia was annexed and Bosnia also joined us a few days later. During the war, we had already started supporting partisans in Istria and Zadar. The Italians had sent an angry message about our activities, but we simply ignored it. After the death of Mussolini, the political situation in Italy has been chaotic and their industry pretty weak. Due to massive investments in the rural south and a larger focus on civilian rather than military factories. Furthermore, our army is bigger and more trained compared to the Italian divisions led by donkeys. After we had supplied our king's loyal partisans and resistance strength had reached high in Zadar and Istria, we launched both revolts. This time both of them managed to rise up and secure both Zadar and Ljubljana, but the Slovenian revolt so close to Italy sadly got crushed without us having the time to aid them. Still, Zadar was a success and they soon joined us. Ljubljana will have to be taken by force. With troops on the Italian, Greek and Turkish borders, we declared war on the Mediterranean Pact. But what we wouldn't expect was a Romanian and Hungarian intervention to stop us from unifying Yugoslavia. We are surrounded on all sides, but don't worry, this is what we have prepared for. Yugoslavia will be united and the Balkans freed from authoritarian leaders.
Srpska se truba s Kosova čuje, Srbina svakog da obraduje. Srpska se truba s Kosova čuje, Srbina svakog da obraduje. Trubite braćo, silnije bolje, opet je srpsko Kosovo polje. Silnije bolje, opet je srpsko Kosovo polje. Srpski junaci, sunce vam sinu, osvetiste se din dušmaninu. Srpski junaci, sunce vam sinu, osvetiste se din dušmaninu. silnije volje, opet je srpsko Kosovo koje.
So we did it, Yugoslavia is united and most of the Balkans has turned into a bastion of democracy in Eastern Europe. Thanks so much for watching and long live the king and our freedom.